Great. Well, welcome then to our Texas Early Learning Council Early Childhood Data Roadmap Work Group meeting. So I feel like if we're on a plane, like if your ticket is for something else, then this is what you're in store for the next hour and change. It is 9:06. This meeting is being produced as a Zoom webinar, so that council members, presenters, and agency staff are all participating as panelists, which is why you can see our little pictures. And members of the public are also able to participate, but only in listen-only mode, unless they are providing testimony or feedback formally. And I'll tell you in a minute how to do that if you want to. Let's see. Please keep your electronic devices on mute when you're not speaking. Megan can also mute meeting participants if needed. And Megan, are you still serving as our facilitator today, or is Chelsea? Yes, Megan, I see the nod. So Megan, our interagency deputy director of early childhood support, will serve as today's meeting facilitator. Please remember to state your name before you speak. And the opportunity to submit public comment closed yesterday at 5, but members of the public are still able to request oral public comment today if they email their request to Megan. And Megan, you are going to drop your instructions in the chat. There you go. Were there any public comment requests as of yesterday?
There were not. So we'll see if anything comes in between now and that moment of the agenda.
Great. So just in terms of tying up some loose ends, if you would take a minute to locate the draft June 2022 meeting minutes, which is either in your email, well, is both in your email and attached to the calendar invitation. So if you have to search, I believe Chelsea was the one that sent them out, but they're also in the calendar invitation. And so I'm just going to give you guys a second to take a look, or if you've already read them, then to call for any changes or edits to those if needed. And if no changes or edits are identified, then just a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thanks, April. And
I second.
Great, thanks, David. All right, so I think we're going to use the official vote also as our roll call. So Megan, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. So when I call your name, please reply for, against, or abstain. Sarah Abrahams.
4.
Weldon Beard.
4.
April Crawford.
4.
David Fagan.
4.
Kim Coffrin. Tori Lee. Kirsten.
4.
Oh, great. Kirsten Schwab. Catherine Sibley.
Abstain.
Laura Varnell. Allison Wilson. And Travis Duke. All right, the motion has carried, and I will pass it back to you, Sarah.
Great. So today we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about our processes and opportunities for stakeholder engagement around the development of this roadmap. This idea of making sure that we had the ideas and input of folks that would be impacted directly by some of the data collaboration and data integration work that we are considering, felt this was a critical opportunity to do that. So in our plan, there are several opportunities for stakeholders to provide feedback. And basically the three main ways that we've identified. One is the listening sessions, which are essentially focus groups or small discussion groups. They are not meant to be sort of all inclusive of every person. In order for us to really have richer discussion, we have proposed holding these listening sessions with a smaller group for a more intimate setting, and hopefully more opportunity for engaged discussion. There's also going to be an opportunity to complete a set of surveys that would go out more broadly. And then, of course, we encourage folks who are interested in learning more or want to share specific feedback to reach out to any of our work group members directly. So these are sort of three on the table ways of providing feedback. I think we're going to tackle all of them today, just talk through what the process is and what the next steps are for those. So first, let's talk a little bit about how we are proposing to organize the stakeholder engagement logistics. So in our last meeting, we talked quite a bit about these stakeholder engagement groups and sort of divided out groups of stakeholders, identified who we thought we needed to have input from in order to create a really thorough and comprehensive roadmap. We agreed that the listening sessions would be conducted virtually so that we could invite representatives from across the state without incurring travel costs or having to juggle the logistics that come with travel. We have a couple of different ways that we've organized these small groups, and we think that for those groups that are sort of based on topic or the system that the sort of data system that the participants are currently using, that it's likely we'll have to draw from various stakeholder groups to have a single conversation about that data system or that specific topic. But there are some situations where we're actually asking for feedback from a specific group, and in those cases, we feel like we may be able to leverage existing or existing meetings where folks are already getting together and trying to find ways to just add ourselves to the agenda in those cases to get the feedback from an already existing group. The listening sessions are going to be taking place in August and September. We are proposing that we target like 10 to 15 participants. In most focus group work, the ideal setup is usually somewhere between 8 and 12. So we said 10 to 15 just because there's always folks that want to engage and then for whatever reason in the moment can't. So just to do a little bit of over inviting to ensure that we get somewhere close to the 8 to 12 participants for an active discussion where folks can really be engaged and have their voices heard. We have also taken a stab at identifying a session lead from our work group, and their role will really be to create the participant list to ensure diverse voices are heard. So we really will be looking at and trying to create some criteria to ensure representation from both urban and rural regions, from large and small organizations, that we have sort of program and geographic diversity. And so we'll really be leaning on our session leads to help create that kind of diverse listening session environment. And that the session lead will be responsible for selecting the date and then actually facilitating the discussion and designating or bringing a note taker. So as we know, it can be very difficult to both facilitate and take notes, but we will rely on the session lead to identify a way of documenting the discussion that is happening. Any questions about that before we dive into how we've divided and who the set? We'll get into the details of that, but any questions just about the conceptual logistics. Okay, so let's dive into the next slide. So this represents sort of how we left our last meeting, more or less, with some very minor tweaks, including the identification or proposal of session leads. So just to walk through it together oh, there we go. This first page is the groups that are based on the data system used. So in the first grouping, it's folks that may be using the TWC or CCR or CLI data. These would include childcare regulation, HHSC, local workforce development boards, and other staff or partners of the Texas Workforce Commission, with Allison and April serving as the session leads for those data system, for that data system session. There is no, okay. The next set of data systems is really TEA specific, but also includes T-Kids, which is the ECI data system, and Head Start data. The session leads that we're proposing are Tori and Travis, and participants may include folks from education service centers, local education agencies, TEA, and ECI. And then last on this slide, the data systems of record include PEERS, which is the DFPS PEI specific data system, Impact, which is partially used by PEI, but more broadly used by DFPS, and other potential data systems and programs, including those at the Department of State Health Services. And so participants would include folks that were engaged from PEI, DFPS, the Department of State Health Services, as well as Help Me Grow affiliates who are using these systems of record. Okay, should we go on to the next slide then, Chelsea or Megan? This slide represents examples of folks that are grouped by topic, as well as data system used. Now, these look like more that they are grouped by group. So the kind of participant that they are, rather than the specific data system that they may use or the specific organization that they belong to. So the first group with the session leads of Kim, David, and Kirsten are really our advocate group. And this was our broadest group. I think our most sort of the one that had the most number in it. And also represent a pretty broad areas of interest. This may be a group that we want to have two discussions with, depending on the size of the participants, the size of the participant list that is identified by the session lead. I think we could do one or two, depending on both availability and bandwidth and how the participant list comes together. And the second list is really a researcher or evaluator list. And that we are proposing that April lead the discussion for that group. And then finally, this is the slide that lists the stakeholder engagement sessions organized by group. And these are places where we believe we may be able to take advantage of already existing meetings or sessions with groups of folks that are coming together anyway. So the first is around our early childhood education service providers, and the proposed session leads are me and Travis, and these are identified PEI, ECI, and Avance program directors. And And then then the second group is really teachers and administrators, which could include center-based child care directors, family child care leaders, public school leaders, Head Start administrators, and the proposed lead for that is Laura. And then finally, there are 2 existing advisory councils that are meeting here in the coming weeks, the ECI Advisory Committee and the Prenatal to 3 Parent Advisory Council. And the proposed lead for both of those would be Kim and David.
Question on the parent groups. So the ECI Advisory Committee that I'm most familiar with is kind of a coalition of ECI providers, who of course would be a great addition to the service providers group. Is this referring to a different parent group?
It says parent, but the ECI Advisory Committee is a governor appointed council or committee, which I actually sit on, but it is also, in addition to 2 representatives that are service providers, it is a variety of other ECI stakeholders from various state agencies, from referral sources, and also there are several parents that are representatives on that particular advisory committee. So it's there are representatives, there are 2 provider representatives on that advisory committee, but it's much broader than that.
Okay, and you know what, as you were talking, I realized I was thinking of the ECI Advocacy Committee, which is a very similar name, but is a group of providers who come together to kind of advocate around funding and things like that. So anyway, that might be a good group to tap for the service providers, but I understand now why they're under parents. Thanks.
That's it. And I actually just realized that the ECI Advisory Committee is meeting here in just a couple of weeks. And so it may be that I hope we are not too late to jump on the train and request some time with that group to walk through our questions. But we may be, depending on timing. So that's something that we probably need to jump on right after this meeting. So Kim and David, maybe that's something that we can either do together or ask Megan and Chelsea to just help us make that connection in terms of taking advantage of an already existing meeting.
I think Gabby is finalizing the agenda right now.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so if someone reaches out to her, she can let you know if there's space.
Thank you.
I apologize, I have my camera off. My daughter's home from school today and
No
she's running around
problem.
behind me. And
Sarah, I wanted to ask on the parent group, we could probably host a separate, just with a parent focus group if there were specific questions that would make sense from, a parent group that wasn't connected to any of these advisory committees. We could probably host that in the next month or so as part of the workshops that we do with parents. We're doing those virtually, and we've done that before for you guys as part of the media campaign. So that's
I'm not opposed to doing that, Kirsten, but here's the reason why we chose these more formal, already existing kind of parent structures. And it was primarily because we weren't sure that just that parents out in the community without a specific, would necessarily use this integrated, they wouldn't necessarily be the primary users of an integrated data system that, in terms of, not that parents in general wouldn't be interested in understanding how the state uses data to make policy plans or to understand program direction, but it seemed that there were these opportunities where parents were already stepping into formal roles in these advisory, either on a statewide or a local kind of parent advisory group, and that we were really trying to target those parents specifically to provide feedback about this data roadmap rather than sort of a more general parent ask, just because it does, just in terms of direct impact, we weren't certain that it would be as relevant. And that's the only reason.
I understand. I mean, because it would require a lot of explanation, I think. But yeah, so I'm not opposed to this plan. I just thought I'd offer that because that's something that we have access to a lot of parents, particularly in Austin and San Antonio. So.
And it may be, Kirsten, that, I mean, the other ways that we've asked folks to engage is through the written survey, which is pretty simple and not that complex. And that may be another way to gather that kind of feedback and certainly, you know, as we get more clear about what we're asking, we may circle back and want to tap into some of those other opportunities to meet and talk with parents directly. Any other questions about this? I think, Megan, is the next slide sort of the roles and responsibilities slide? Now I can't remember the order. Yes, I think it is. Okay. So this is basically the sum up about, as we've proposed having session leads, we realize that there may be some questions about what exactly does that mean and what did the session lead do versus what would Chelsea or Megan as kind of our staff support help us with. The first order of business will be to determine a date and time for the listening session based on essentially based on the session leads availability. And then to work either independently or with your co-lead to create a participant list. But Chelsea will be the one to create the Zoom meeting and manage the technology, also to invite the participants by email and ensure they have the materials ahead of time. Either Chelsea or Megan will actually run the Zoom meeting and manage the day of kind of logistics. And the session lead would really be responsible for leading the meeting, you know, facilitating the discussion based on the slides and questions that we've already developed, and then ensuring that there's some kind of documentor, whether it's someone from their team that they bring in or someone within the group that they've asked to take notes, but that we're asking the session leads to take on that piece as well, even though it wouldn't necessarily be them specifically. Any questions or concerns about that?
If I'm understanding correctly, it's one session.
That's what we're thinking. And again, this is not meant to say that we're going to talk to every single person. It's really trying to get a representative group, and these listening sessions are really intended to be able to have conversations with groups of like folks that would be impacted or that would have sort of skin in the game a little bit in terms of creating this kind of system to better understand what are the concerns, questions, and goals that these folks may have about the kind of system that we're analyzing or thinking about proposing, or the kinds of recommendations that we're considering making.
So recognizing that each of the stakeholder groups are a bit different in terms of what they want to focus on, or their expertises, or even the jargon they use. I was wondering to what degree we'll have sort of a template for how the meeting should flow and be kind of facilitated. You know, what are we trying to cover in each of them? What are the kind of main goals? You know, what are sort of our guardrails for how these conversations should go? And then what are the areas in which the session lead should sort of take liberties to do things beyond that? I guess that's sort of a vague question, but I guess I was curious in sort of what sort of parameters we were thinking and whether we were going to put something together like that.
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question, David. So let's go to the next slide. And
Okay, Steve.
we've drafted a template of the PowerPoint that we could use at the beginning of that meeting to just set the context, explain why we're there and what we're trying to get out of it, and then also the questions that we had drafted when we met last time. So none of this should look surprising to you guys, but it is newly packaged for the session leads to use in their listening session. So why don't we just go through that together? And then if there's anything we need to add or tweak or change, and I hear what you're saying, that there may be some changes that the session leads want to make based on their specific listening session, and that is also totally fine. So this is sort of the first page, just our welcome page. Welcome and introduction, that we're going to do an overview, and that really the main part of this is to get their feedback. Just an outline of who sits currently on the Early Childhood Data Roadmap Work Group. And then some initial high-level explanation about what is an early childhood integrated data system and why would it be important? So this is all information that we've shared with you guys, and then also with the bigger Texas Early Learning Council. So why is this work connected to that? Yep, no, go ahead. And then what are the specific purposes and goals, and what do we think we might use this kind of integrated data to do? And I'm hopeful that this in particular, this slide will help spark some conversation with our groups, right? Because this is really this is the why behind tackling something like this. This is sort of the kinds of questions, this is the list or the way that we've begun to categorize what kinds of questions we think we could ask that we can't answer now, but that we think creating a more integrated data system would help us answer. And this may also be a place of discussion and diving with the group. Do these questions resonate? Would this be helpful to them? Are there things that they would want to add or know about? This is our very busy but very comprehensive current visual about how our early childhood data works, where it comes from, and what agencies are involved, in part to just showcase how complex it is now. And then just an explanation about how they fit into the bigger picture, where we are in the process and where these listening sessions fit. And then to dive into some of the questions. Based on our conversation from last meeting, we really tried to create a short series of kind of open-ended questions for these listening sessions, but certainly it would be up to the facilitator to decide how to divide the time and how to, what rabbit holes to cut off and where to dive more deeply with the group. So the first question, how are you currently using and integrating data at the state and local level? So what does that look like now? Not just how are you using data, but also how are you using data from other systems? How are you combining data now? I think those are interesting questions to ask especially to our administrators, policymakers, and professional data folks as we consider what our options might be. And then these were the sort of foundational questions that we had determined in our last meeting. And so we really wanted to ask from them, what feedback do they have on the way that we're asking these questions? Are these the right questions to be asking? Are there things that are more important to know or that we need more information about before we can even answer these questions? So this is this is sort of checking our foundational question proposal. And then these are sort of the beyond the foundational questions, sort of our other set of policy questions that we had been including as how we might, as what things we might learn with a more integrated system. And again, these were pulled really from our conversation last time and should all look very familiar. And then we just have a couple of additional questions here, including, including if we were going to move forward with this, how do you think you might use it? So that's the new data use question. And then the next question is really, and then how do you think it would impact your work? How would it change what you're doing now? And then finally, is there anything else that you want to know that you can't answer because you don't have the data? The data doesn't exist, we're not capturing it, or we're not combining it in a way that helps you answer a question that is important to your work. So that's really essentially how we've laid out the group. Again, it's a pretty packed time, but we really did think it was important to spend some time at the beginning setting the context. I don't know that we've totally decided if these meetings would be 60 or 90 minutes. I think that in part depends on the group and the session leads availability. I think 60 minutes would be a very tight listening session. And so 90 minutes might be more appropriate, but it's sometimes hard to get folks attention for 90 minutes. So I think we'll just leave that. I don't know that we need to make a blanket decision. I think we can have the session leads determine that based on what they know about the group, what their own availability is. So that's sort of that is the draft. Oh, yes. And then, thank you. And then, certainly we would offer that they could, in addition to participating in these listening sessions, also participate in the surveys that we'll be sending out. So you don't have to choose one, you can do both. And then just to let them know that the roadmap that we're working on will be published in January. That's the timeline that we're working towards. So that they'll be able to see their feedback in motion. So I didn't take a pause to get feedback about any individual slide, but I'd love to hear your overall feedback about the deck and the approach. And then certainly if you have specific feedback about an individual slide, we can talk about it. And I think that the leads should feel that they can add or tweak to any of these things based on what they know about the population or how they think they can elicit the most rich information or feedback from that group.
Good morning.
Well done.
Good morning. I do apologize for my camera situation. I have a lot of noise going in the background. They're working on the roof of my building, so I do apologize that. Thank you for allowing me to join this group. And I was
Glad to have you.
look at some of this information. In regards to those groups, and I see where you're targeting some Head Start programs. Are there the Head Start programs traditionally with the Region Service Center or school district? Are there any community action type Head Start programs that might be for these listening groups? Or am I missing?
I think we want, yes, I think it's really any Head Start. And I think we're really likely going to lean on you to help us identify who you think might be most appropriate given the criteria that we've offered, like really trying to create a diverse group of folks. These are really meant to be kind of representative feedback groups or discussion groups. So certainly we know we're not going to be able to extend an invitation to every Head Start director or administrator. And so I think we'd really be relying on you to help us identify a small handful of folks that would be able to participate and offer their feedback.
Okay, because I was looking at it, because I know with Head Start is so diverse as far as you have some who's in the school district setting, so a lot of that's going to just probably line up. You have some with a community action program where they're more nonprofit.
Yeah,
You do have some on the Indian reservation, so that's a whole new dynamic in itself.
yeah, true.
So yeah, most definitely. And also I saw where the database for Head Start was Child Plus. I know there's a couple other popular databases that Head Start may use. And I can share that information with the group too.
That would be great.
Build those bridges, those databases. But no, it looks good. I mean, kind of excited, kind of directly everything is going. So.
Yeah, me too. Any other feedback or comments?
I think what I'm wondering, and part of this is like how you build the participant list. In some ways, the questions are kind of more tailored to people who are already data users in some capacity from these systems. And I'm wondering, there are a lot of people who in their role are, would be data users if there was, something different about access to data, visibility of what's available. So I'm trying to figure out, when you build these participant lists, are you specifically looking for people who already have some level of utilization, or are you looking for people in these roles who would be, likely and, should want to be consumers of these data?
Well, that's a good question. I'm open to thinking about it in whatever way you guys think is the most useful, but my initial feeling or my initial feedback is that the reason we're holding these listening sessions is really to help us articulate and frame a roadmap for this integrated data use. And so while I certainly don't disagree that access and even just knowing about what exists are certainly barriers to the way that we use data now. I don't know that our charge is really about how to make the data more accessible at this point. I think it's really about how do we determine where our data might align, where we need to better match, how to integrate the systems that we're currently using or identify new systems. And I just think it would be in these listening sessions, I think it would be difficult to set enough context for non-users to help us answer those questions. It's not that we don't need to come back to folks who aren't currently using it and ensure that we understand what the barriers are and why they may not feel like they have access or understand what access they have. But in terms of what our charge is, which is really to try to propose a roadmap around the data as it is, and how we're using it and how we'd like to use it. I don't know that we have enough time or bandwidth to include the context or to help folks understand the current system that exists if they're not currently users. That's just my initial thinking in terms of how we're using this set of listening sessions. Does that make sense, April? Or do you think we're missing the mark if we do that?
No, I mean, I think it makes sense. It's just, I know there are, and this is, maybe I'm speaking for sort of the research kind of line of this. There are users who they have familiarity with the systems, but there's difficulty in making the kind of linkages that you would need to be able to make in order to actually conduct research.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So they're knowledgeable enough that the systems are here, these respective agencies, collect this information, but I wouldn't call them users in the sense that they're
No.
actually able to produce findings with what's.
No, I think that makes sense. And those might be actually good resources for these that kind of that situation, I think might be a good representative on one of these listening sessions. And I agree about the parents are in a unique place as well, but I think that's why we really wanted to lean on sort of already existing parent leaders and users. So parents who are participating in these, like in the PN3 Parent Advisory Committee or on the ECI Advisory Council, are already accessing and using data as a part of their role in those advisory councils or as a part of their role as a parent leader. So they're sort of in the middle a little bit in those ways, which is one of the reasons to the point that we were talking about earlier. It's not sort of general population folks. It's really individuals that are holding both of those roles at the same time, both a parent role and also kind of an advisory council member in one person. So that's sort of why we chose those specific stakeholders for that. So let's talk a little bit about next steps then. So for the folks that were listed, and we can, as a follow-up email, just send like a list. Here are the groups and here are the session leads. But our role in this work group is to make sure you know which session you have been assigned to. And if that is a problem for any reason, please reach out to me or Chelsea or Megan like as soon as possible so that we can figure out an alternate route. But your job is to make sure you know which session you're leading, work with your co-lead if there is one to determine a date and time for your session. I think we were assuming an hour and a half for these sessions, but certainly that's at your discretion. We want these sessions to happen ideally between August 22nd and September 16th. And our request is that by August 11th to share the dates. And so that's like coming up next week, at the end of next week, to share the dates and times for your session that you've identified with Chelsea, and to share your proposed participant list with Chelsea. And if you have any additional feedback on the PowerPoint or on the survey we're going to talk about, especially if there are specific tweaks you'd like to recommend for the session that you are leading, then that is something that we can, of course, accommodate and that Chelsea will help us manage. All right, I don't see anyone jumping out of their Zoom screen, so I'm going to assume that means this all makes sense and feels doable. Okay. So we're going to talk about the survey next? Is that, okay. And do you want me to do that, or Chelsea or Megan, are you going to walk through the survey? Either.
I can walk through the survey.
That'd be great.
So it's basically, it'll look very familiar. So it's basically a kind of a companion to the listening sessions with very similar questions. But I think the goal of the survey is to get some mildly quantitative data to attach to some of the information that we're getting from the listening sessions. And April, I see your hand is raised.
If you want, I can wait until after. I just remember something I wanted to say about the focus group questions, but it's the same issue that I want to ask you about.
Okay.
Questions. I don't know if you want to do it with focus group questions or I'll wait.
I'll be brief in going over these so that we can open it up for discussion. So you'll see that we just asked some very basic background information. And if you scroll down, we ask about the specific data that their organization is contributing to, and we list, this is basically a list of all of the data systems that are in the visualization that we shared earlier. So if anything is missing from this list or it's characterized incorrectly, please let me know. You can scroll down. Keep going. Okay, and then we ask about the person filling it out. We'll ask about their data use, same group of data systems as before. You can scroll through that. And then we ask them if they are currently integrating or combining data above and have some open-ended questions. If they are, if they're facing any challenges, and if they're not, do they have any plans to integrate or combine data in the future? And then every main topic, we have a kind of a catch-all, please share additional comments, where we're hoping to get some additional qualitative data. Because the survey, I think the plan is to share it pretty widely. So the listening sessions are going to be very focused, but the survey, we can collect data from a much broader audience. So we want to make sure that we're capturing any information that they want to share with us. And then we have the policy questions, where we're getting feedback on how relevant each of the policy questions are to their work. Scroll down. If there are, so we're trying to get at any breakouts that they would like to see in the data. So here we have, how important is it to analyze data by the following characteristics? And then we have an open category. We know geography has come up several times. We want to make sure that we get some information on how important different breakout groups are. And then we have a bunch of open questions about how they would use data if we did end up collecting and integrating data related to the policy questions. So these are all open-ended. Can scroll through. And then to get at the impact, we just ask how each of the questions would impact their work. And then I think that is the last question, besides asking if there are any additional questions that they can't currently answer, and then any general inputs. So I will open it up, April, if you have any comments, or the rest of the group.
I think the thing that I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to make sure. So the ECIDS roadmap, it really will only be dealing with historical or archived data, right? It won't be dealing with a lot of the participants that will likely be part of these sessions and respondents to the survey. They will be people who actually use the data systems in a more real-time way to support the implementation of their program or whatever it is they do. So, we'll likely have people, let's say, who use Twist or TechPeds, and they actually use it. They're contributors, they contribute data. So they will have a lot of potentially data questions and things they can and can't do that are really more about implementation of their current work versus what do you need to do with historical data. So I'm wondering what we can do in both the survey and the focus groups, or do we want to help them steer clear of focusing on, well, when I put in data for X, I want to be able to pull a report that does Y, and I can't see that. Because we'll have a lot of system users who respond.
April, I just want to make sure I understand what your question is. So are you trying to distinguish between sort of the conceptual way that they might want to use data to inform their work as opposed to like the specific systems limitations of their current database, essentially.
Maybe it's the difference between use of historical data, where it's not about you as a contributor to data, because we'll end up with people in all of these groups who, let's say when you have providers, childcare providers in the mix, well, they actually use tech heads for their daily work. They actually contribute data for Twist. They contribute data to these
Right.
systems. And I don't think you really are looking for them I don't think their frame of response is supposed to be, how can you make these systems that I use better? I think the frame of response we're looking for is, if you're using data outputs from these systems in a more historical or archival sense, what do you do with the data?
I'm not sure I'm totally following the distinction that you're making. Because there could be user cases, even in the way that we've framed some of the why, that would be real time or sort of using data that they would have access to now versus, so I guess I'm not totally clear.
I think that's great. I think that's where my misunderstanding has been. I've been thinking that the eSIDS is not really intended to benefit, to like improve my experience as someone who's charged with using a particular data system. It's really more about stepping out of you using that data system.
Well, I think, I think that one of the things that we're trying to identify is in terms of better understanding. Some of the questions that we're asking are really, how do we know how families are coming through various systems? So you're right in that this isn't going to address it's not going to address the limitations or design of any one particular system. So if they're saying, well, I use this system all the time and it's super frustrating because it doesn't pull the report in this way, or I'd like to, then you're right. That's not something that we're really going to be able to spend a lot of time on. But if what they want to say is I'm in this system and I'm using this as a childcare worker or as a daycare administrator, but I know that my families that we're serving are also in these other systems, and I don't have any way of better understanding how they're flowing through those systems, or what our collective outcomes are, or if a child gets this kind of thing and this kind of thing, do they exponentially get better, or does it not matter if they receive both of those things together? Like, those are the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer as we look at the early childhood system as a collective system. And right now, because all the data is so siloed, we can't do that. We can't understand how our systems work together. So you're right that we do want to try to help folks think about the data. Like, the questions we're asking is not necessarily about the data system they use every day, although it is in part about that, but it's really about how do we think about this data from a systems perspective, and how do we think about your work even more holistically, the kinds of questions you're asking about your output and outcomes more holistically. Are there questions that you would like to be able to answer that you can't because your system isn't connected to any other systems? So I do think we can clarify that as a part of the context we're setting, both when we're asking these survey questions and when we're having the listening sessions, because I can see exactly what you're saying is that there's a real danger that the rabbit hole will go down will be this system will be specific to the one system that they use every day. That's what they know the best.
Do you think it's true that the ESIDS, I'm just trying to think about, like the recency of the information they'll actually have access to. So just for example, like TextR3, that would be clearly historical data, that would be sort of a snapshot from a certain period that lives in that data. Whereas like childcare regulation, when we're integrating childcare regulation data that comes through texas.gov, it's updated, daily. So we actually are able to like consume data from another system that's recent enough to matter for what we are doing right now today for a specific school participant, whatever the case may be. So I think that's what I'm trying to
I see what you're
understand.
saying. Because
It's going to be real time enough
no,
to
it's
be
not.
that. So if I'm working in, let's say we are talking to a provider and what they really want to know involves information that would be really recent. I'm not sure ESIDS, it feels like ESID is going to be historical in
Yes,
nature.
I think now that I understand the distinction you're making, I think to my understanding, we aren't talking about an integrated system that would be like real time what is this what is the service available, right? How is this happening right now in real time? Because so many of our systems don't work that way.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that that's never something that we want to think about or talk about, but in terms of the kinds of questions that we are looking at asking, you're right, they are more about point in time kinds of questions, like how do all these point in time systems overlap so that we have an overall understanding about how this thing is working or how we're answering this question, rather than being able to pull up, for example, I don't know that we could in real time understand how many slots are available across all of our early childhood service providers. Like how many slots and where are they? That kind of real-time data that might help folks like in their existing referral networks or something like that at a state level. I don't think that that's what we're aiming for here. I think the aim for ESIDS is really more about understanding impact, answering policy questions, understanding sort of collective budgeting and program planning questions. So
that helps. Like, I think I just need to keep what you just said in my mind, because I think when we do the groups with people who their experience with the data has probably been less about understanding what happened in the past, their experience is more about getting their job done today.
yeah,
As sort
I
of
see
data
what you're saying.
consumers, or, like in the moment consumers versus people who are, let's say, planning an analysis because they need to understand what happened historically and how that might shape what they're doing.
Chelsea or Megan, am I saying anything that is surprising to you or that seems wrong? Because now please stop me.
I think this is a great discussion to have. And I don't think you're wrong. I think it's just a matter of, it'll depend on if we do pursue a system, how that system is built. But I think all the points that both of you made are valid and things that we need to be thinking about when making recommendations. Megan, do you have anything to add?
I think, and April, I know you've been closer to the TextR3 dashboard, and so that's part of what you're using as the benchmark. I would say it'll depend on the regularity of update of the systems that we end up including or the data sources we end up including. So I could see it being TextR3, for those who aren't as familiar with it, is kind of a annual snapshot at best. I don't think we would be restricted to that stale of a snapshot in this going forward, if that makes sense.
Sarah, I wonder if you or Chelsea or Megan could maybe put together some talking points that would be helpful for the stakeholders, so we can maintain some consistency, but also if that question comes up and if it's something particular to us, like you said, Sarah, about a specific system, that we have some way of channeling that great information to some, whether it's that agency or, that there's some way of collecting that and giving that back to the agencies responsible.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I have a feeling when I present to our program directors, their first question is this replacing T-Kids? So I'm gonna have to explain some things to them right off the bat, probably. So yeah, something like that would be helpful.
And we are for sure not going to make any recommendations right now about specific changes to individual systems. Like, I don't think that's within the scope of our analysis. We can certainly share that feedback back with the systems, but to Travis's point, I don't think we as this work group want to be responsible for making specific recommendations or offering a path for change to any state agency's individual system. It's more about how can these systems better work together.
And specifically how the data outputs can work together.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Yes. Thank you for clarifying.
To Travis's point, I was with a group of providers in another work group meeting, either like late last week or actually I think it was yesterday. And the providers what the providers were saying is, can't you make this easier so we don't have to put data into Twist? TRS is over here, TechPeds is over here. Is there a way we can, get all of our data in a simplified way? And I think sometimes people who contribute data, they think about data systems from that contribution perspective, and maybe not as often from the, okay, forget about how the data got into these systems. Now you have this way to access the output. What would you do with it?
I had a question, but it's sort of shifting gears, so I wanted to see if others had a thought, something April mentioned or anything before I totally shifted. Okay. On question 11, which is the one that we're like partially saying, I don't know the value of it exactly, because to me, and maybe I'm thinking about this in the wrong way, I don't imagine we're going to get a lot of negative impact responses. I think people would want information. And I suppose my bigger question is like, how will you use the data, or what would you like to use the data for, more than would it have a negative impact or a positive impact? But maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. So I just wanted to ask.
It's hard to imagine how any access to data would have a negative impact.
Right.
I agree. And I'm not sure what you do. Like if someone says they care a lot about, let's say economic returns on investments, but they said they didn't care about some of those other questions, well, they probably can't answer the question they got at that point anyway. You know what I mean? Because some of these are interdependent. You have to have some of the pieces in order to get what you need. For maybe the one question you said you did care about.
So it sounds like we're, maybe prioritizing, or it's hard with surveys because open-ended questions don't often get answered. So I know that we are trying to simplify here a little bit.
Well, I think it would be better to do either a ranking or an impact scale, like we've done in different parts of the survey, of like how beneficial would this be versus, or like rank which ones would be the highest priority. I mean, I think that those would be more helpful, just because again, negative and no impact, I think you're just going to be answered in very low rate. And I almost would wonder if someone misunderstood the question if they answered that way. But again, maybe there's a rationale I'm not thinking of that would make this more useful. But to me, it's like, what are we trying to get at? I think we want to know what people find the most important for their work. And I think there are better ways to get at that.
Mhm.
Because I would answer positive impact for all of them, but I'm sure I would have some that I'm like, this one's really, really important, and this one's like nice to have. But they would be answered the same way.
Yeah, so I think we probably either need to, I mean, we need to take another look at this question and either restructure it to ask for some kind of prioritization, or it may even be, I mean, I know I just I'm creating a conflict with the thing I just said about open-ended questions, but it may be that we can just take like our foundational questions, not every one of these questions, but the one or two that we've already prioritized as a work group, and ask like, if you had access to this information, how would you use it? Or like, how would it benefit you? Like that, because those just some of that open-ended question might help us, again, make a case for the kind of integrated system that we may be proposing. So if we could get some quotes or some survey for folks to say, yes, I think this is important, and here's specifically how I would use it, that might be helpful. And just to ask it about one or two of the ones that we've already prioritized.
And, you know, maybe there's a way to sort of split the difference, and it might take a little more work, but we could give folks options of the kinds of ways to use this data and see what they like, select all that apply. Like, how would you use this? You would use this in your advocacy to state leaders around funding. You would use this to evaluate your program. You know, I don't know. But like we give a few options on them, and then people can select, I would use this for these purposes. I would use this other one for those other purposes. And then you have an other option where people can kind of add more color to their responses. I'm thinking out loud, obviously, but I guess, and I'm thinking about this too in the work groups where we're going to go through the policy questions. I feel like people's reactions to them shouldn't be like wordsmithing the policy questions again, but like, what do you really want this for? And like, why would this be helpful? And how would you use it? I don't know.
Another problem with surveys in general is can be just length. And if you look at this survey, it's quite long. It's because I know there's only 13 questions, but there's like 10 responses for some of them. So you just might want to think about paring it down a little bit too, if we want a bigger response. Because otherwise folks that are just really, really invested are going to be the ones that respond. But I like it the way it is too, though. So I mean, I'm not, I don't mean to be negative, sorry.
Now, length of survey is always something we have to think about, right? If we want, but some of the reason why it looks long here is because we've listed out all the choices, but on the survey itself, it would just be a checkbox and not.
Yeah, maybe I'm just not seeing it the way it's going to be presented.
But I do think it's worth I mean, once we see it like in the actual format that it's going to be in, we may decide we need to even break it down more. So it sounds like we have we maybe have a little tweaking to do of this survey that maybe we can go back in and redraft and even just send it. I think we can just send it back out to this group for a final approval if we make some of these adjustments before we send it out, because this will go out before we meet again, right, Chelsea?
Correct.
It almost seems like you could just remove 11. It's overlaps enough with relevance that maybe that helps shorten it.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, maybe.
I thought about recommending that too. I was actually just pulling up my version of it so I could scroll through and look at the previous questions again to see if I would recommend that, because I was just looking to see, do we need it, or is there something else that kind of answers the same thing?
8 is very similar. you
Yeah.
know, relevant and impactful. Feel similar enough.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, because 8 is sort of like one of the options I recommended for 11. So yeah.
Mhm.
I think we would lose nothing by getting rid of it. The only question I think is, would we benefit by changing it in a certain way? But I know we're sort of at, we're wanting to send this soon. So
This, again, this doesn't, we said that we were going to do more than one. So if we feel like we need to go back and ask a follow-up question, because something we can, like, this doesn't have to be the only time we ever ask. So I feel like, to the points that you guys have made, let's streamline and tighten it and send it out. And then if the listening sessions bring up some trend or something we need to follow up on in a survey, or the surveys themselves mean that we want to send out 1 or 2 additional questions, we can absolutely do that down the road.
and I think likewise, like, let's ensure the listening sessions get at the things that the survey isn't able to sufficiently because of it, what we're trying to do. So
Yeah,
which I think we can accomplish in our discussion over the policy questions.
yeah. Okay, any final survey comments then? Chelsea, are the next steps then that we'll send out one final draft and then move forward with sharing more broadly?
Yes, I can make tweaks and send out a final version for final feedback.
Okay, I think we are good. Megan, have we gotten anyone demanding, not asking, requesting public comment?
We did not.
Demanding sounds so harsh. That's not how I meant it.
We did not, but for those tuned in, just as a reminder, anyone is always welcome to give public comment. And the upcoming meetings, there are 3 once a month. For the coming 3 months are all listed on earlylearningtexas.org in the meetings section. And the registration links for those will be posted very shortly as well.
So let's just talk about our next meetings then. These are them. So by our next meeting on the 20th, we should have completed all of our listening sessions. So that's a fast and furious few weeks ahead, but hopefully we've divided it in such a way that it feels manageable. And Chelsea, will you go back to the timeline just in terms of the session leads responsibilities one more time so we can make sure that folks have those dates on their mind? So just as a reminder, our next steps as session leads is to pick a date between August 22nd and September 16th, and by August 11th, which is the end of next week, right? Is to share the dates and times with Chelsea, share the participant list with Chelsea, and that will be the deadline for any additional feedback on the materials or the survey.
Could we also get a copy of the draft PowerPoint for the
Mhm.
listening sessions? I want to meet with my leadership here to help me choose who to invite. I want to share some details from that.
It's in the PowerPoint slide that you received for today's
It is
meeting.
okay. Okay. Oh, I was looking in the meeting invite. I forgot about the other email that came this morning. Yeah. Okay. I'll go look there.
Okay.
And I'll need it because our next PD meeting is on the 18th. So I'll probably, and it's going to be a face-to-face. So I'll probably have
great.
to do it then. Yeah, use it then.
Okay. Any other final comments, questions? Chelsea or Megan, anything we've missed? Okay. Well then, thank you guys so much for your feedback. And I think the changes that we made today are really positive ones. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how our listening sessions go. And Catherine, I'm maybe calling on you to help me sort out the ones that I'm assigned to.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
All right. Okay, well, with that, then we will adjourn here at 10:21.